The views and reflections shared in this podcast are personal interpretations and are intended to inspire reflection and exploration. They don't represent official positions or universal truths, but are offered as one perspective among many. Welcome to Mystican Identity, the podcast that invites you to discover unity in every tradition. I'm Phoenix Kevlin, and in each episode we explore the timeless wisdom woven through mystical teachings, religions, and spiritual philosophies, all leading us to a deeper connection with one another. Today we'll be wrapping up our look at the nature of the ground from the Perennial Philosophy, a journey into the heart of shared spiritual beauty and the universal truths that bind us. Today, we're concluding our journey through the chapter, The Nature of the Ground, in Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy. It's been a profound exploration, and today we're diving into one of the most thought-provoking ideas yet. And with this look at the Perennial Philosophy, I'm really moving fast through it. It's almost like a Cole's Notes kind of a version of the Perennial Philosophy. The things in the nature of the ground at a later time, I'm going to dive into and expand a bit more on those because there's so much to flesh out. It's really intriguing. But for now, we're going to reflect on a powerful statement from philosopher René Descartes. Descartes said that when we consider the nature of time or the duration of things, for this is of such a kind that its parts are not mutually dependent and never coexistent. And accordingly, from the fact that we are not, it does not necessarily follow that we shall be a moment afterwards, unless some cause, that which first produced us, shall, as it were, continually reproduce us, that is, conserve us. In other words, Descartes is pointing out that each moment of existence doesn't automatically lead to the next. We rely on a sustaining force to conserve us, to hold us in being, even as time marches on in fragmented, isolated moments. There's something outside of us, or maybe within us, that recreates us from one moment to the next. Aldous Huxley takes this insight and expands on it in a way that resonates with many spiritual traditions. He introduces the idea that this sustaining force, or ground, as he calls it, is like an unchanging essence that flows through everything. Huxley aligns this ground with the Tao, the life-sustaining force of the universe. It's as if the Tao, or ground, acts like an unsleeping intelligence that constantly is at work, sustaining life and guiding natural processes without us needing to think about it. In Huxley's view, this Tao, or Logos, as it's also known, isn't just some abstract principle. It's the divine intelligence that keeps everything functioning. Imagine it as the unseen force that causes our hearts to beat, our lungs to breathe, and every cell to repair itself, all without our conscious effort. This is the ground, holding each moment of existence together, piece by piece, body by body. And this is where we enter into the idea of reincarnation. If this ground, or Tao, truly sustains life moment by moment, could it also sustain life across lifetimes? Just as our consciousness depends on this ground to keep us alive from one second to the next, might we also depend on it to carry us through different lives, beyond the limits of any single moment or lifetime? Huxley's vision suggests that the Tao, or this unsleeping intelligence, is timeless. It flows through us in each incarnation, binding us to a greater unity, a universal presence that transcends individual lives. Reincarnation, then, might be an expression of this continuous recreation, a way that the ground manifests through us again and again, even as each life comes and goes. So, when we consider this ground as the link that holds us together, not just in one life, but across many, there's a sense of profound continuity. Each of us carries this sustaining force within, something eternal that isn't bound by the limits of time or form. So as we continue, let's keep this in mind, that within each of us, there's this part that transcends time, a spark of that timeless ground. And with that, let's move into the next part of our exploration of the nature of the ground. So Huxley leads us deeper into the ways this sustaining force or divine ground interacts with the world and with each of us individually. In the last episode, we discussed very briefly the 4 ways Huxley describes how our minds interact with our bodies and the environment. And just as our physical health can be impacted by the state of our minds, Huxley suggests that there's a kind of divine serenity and goodwill at the heart of things. This divine presence may be the reason why, despite all the troubles and evils we see around us, the world itself has not completely fallen apart. Huxley describes the world as chronically sick, but never fatally so, thanks to this unchanging ground that holds it together. But Huxley doesn't ignore the darker side of human behavior. He suggests that other consciousnesses, perhaps minds twisted by thoughts of ego, rebellion, or evil, which I would just put as ego, could also influence our world, accounting for the most extreme and improbable acts of wickedness we sometimes see. In this view, these dark forces create disturbances in an otherwise balanced divine system. So next, Huxley draws a fascinating comparison between human action and divine action. When we act, we accomplish our will either through our physical bodies, guided by what he calls the physiological intelligence, or, on rare occasions, through extraordinary means. Similarly, Huxley suggests that the divine mind, or providence, works in the universe in both natural and miraculous ways. Most of the time, divine providence works through the ordinary laws of nature, so that events may seem coincidental or purely natural. But Huxley suggests that on very special occasions, the divine mind can act directly on the universe outside of these usual means, and we experience these events as miracles or moments of grace. These are the rare instances where the divine ground reaches beyond the everyday to show us something extraordinary. And finally, Huxley addresses how the ground, or divine mind, might communicate with us. Sometimes, he says, this communication happens indirectly by influencing the events and circumstances around us like subtle messages embedded within our lives. Have you ever experienced a coincidence that seemed, just a little too perfect, or a chance encounter that felt significant? Huxley suggests that these might not be mere coincidences, but deliberate actions of the ground, meant to speak to us in a language that we can understand. At other times, the divine mind might communicate more directly, as though transferring a thought or insight into our minds. This could take the form of an inner voice, a feeling, or even a sudden realization that seems to come out of nowhere. I relate this to the whole, I should turn left instead of right. But instead of it being an idea, there is a compulsion or a conviction behind this urgency to make one decision in front of the other. Perhaps this has happened to you? Well, Huxley invites us to consider these moments as possible whispers from the divine ground, guiding us to a deeper awareness of its presence. So, as we contemplate these ideas, Huxley suggests that the ground is not just a distant force, but one intimately involved in our lives, speaking to us through both the ordinary and the extraordinary. It's this patient, sustaining presence that allows each of us to take steps closer to understanding the divine. And in this understanding, grace becomes more than a single moment, it becomes an era. It's an ongoing invitation, renewing with each life to peel back the layers of ego and attachment and to align with that timeless ground. Through reincarnation, each life serves as a new chance to evolve, experience, and ultimately return to the divine source. So, what Huxley proposes is that the ground is not a strict judge who grants one opportunity, but a compassionate force, offering us a timeless era in which we can gradually recognize our unity with it. Grace, then, is a compassionate patience of the ground, holding each life, each moment, as part of an endless journey back to the divine. And as we delve further, Huxley introduces us to this intriguing view of God, inspired by the mystic Meister Eckhart. Eckhart speaks of God as one who becomes and disbecomes. In other words, God is not entirely outside of time. There's a sense that, like everything else, the divine is affected by time's movement, able to become, in some ways, yet also to disbecome. But Huxley raises an important question here. If God were purely a temporal being, unanchored in anything timeless, then that God would be just as vulnerable to time's cycles as we are. A God who only becomes is a God who might be subject to change, growth, and potentially decline. The divine would be swept along in time, risking decay and loss. So Huxley points us towards a more stable understanding of the divine. He describes what he calls the Godhead, a timeless, unchanging ground in which all things are rooted. This Godhead exists in what he calls the eternal now, where past, present, and future merge into a single unchanging reality. So, in this sense, we might think of the Godhead as a source of grace that extends beyond the limits of a single lifetime, rather than viewing grace as a finite period, a one-chance moment within a lifetime. Huxley's vision suggests that the grace operates within the framework of an era, a cycle that spans many lifetimes. And in this view, reincarnation is an ongoing opportunity granted by the divine ground, allowing us to continually evolve, learn, and purify our understanding of the ground itself. It's as if, through reincarnation, each lifetime serves as a new chance to align with the divine, to peel away the layers of ego and attachment, and to discover our place in that timeless awareness. Rather than a single moment of grace, we have this larger era, a compassionate extension from the ground that allows us to gradually, over many lives, return to our source. And Huxley believes that the ultimate purpose for our existence, this becoming, is to eventually return to the timeless ground. Through purifying our hearts and letting go of attachment, we come closer to the eternal now and the unchanging awareness at the heart of all things. And when we reach this awareness, he says, we don't just know the divine ground, we realize that, in a deep sense, we are it. So this idea of grace becomes more than a one-time offer, like a come on down. It's an ongoing invitation. Each life is a step closer to understanding the ground and recognizing our unity with it. In Huxley's view, the ground isn't a distant judge, but rather a patient presence, always there, extending grace as a timeless era in which we can evolve, experience, and ultimately reunite with the divine. In the Perennial Philosophy, Huxley quotes Meister Eckhart, who sheds light on this concept with a profound distinction. Eckhart says, "Meanwhile, I beseech you by the eternal and imperishable truth, and by my soul consider, grasp the unheard of. God and Godhead are as distinct as heaven and earth. Heaven stands 1,000 miles above the earth, and even so the Godhead is above God. God becomes and disbecomes. Whoever understands this preaching, I wish him well. But even if nobody had been there, I must still have preached this to the poor box." Here, Eckhart introduces the idea that there's a divine presence, God, that moves within time, changing and evolving. But above that is the Godhead, a timeless, unchanging essence that transcends all becoming and disbecoming. In other words, Eckhart is pointing to an ultimate reality, the ground, that holds everything, even the divine itself, beyond the reach of time. So when Huxley speaks of the ground as a compassionate force, offering us grace beyond lifetimes, he's drawing on this distinction. The God who becomes may change, but the Godhead, the ground, is always present, providing us with a timeless opportunity to reconnect, to realign, and ultimately to return. Huxley continues by reflecting on Meister Eckhart, not as a mystic, but as a writer. Eckhart was a master of German prose, one of its early inventors. But as Huxley points out, the power of Eckhart's language sometimes led him to make bold, almost extreme statements. His style pushed him to explore ideas that were provocative, influenced by his gift for forceful expression. One might read Eckhart and think that he disregarded the personal God, what the Vedantists call the lower knowledge of Brahman. But that's not entirely true. In fact, like the Vedantists, Eckhart saw devotion to the personal God as a genuine form of knowledge and a necessary step on the path to understanding the Godhead. It's more like a preparatory stage that helps us develop the capacity for the unitive knowledge of the ground. So let's consider one of Eckhart's most famous statements. God is not good, I am good. So on the surface, it sounds almost heretical, but Huxley clarifies that Eckhart wasn't denying God's goodness. Instead, he was making a comparison, suggesting that human goodness, as we understand it, is limited. The Godhead's isness, as Eckhart called it, contains goodness, love, wisdom, and all the virtues in their purest, most boundless form. For Eckhart, this distinction between God and the Godhead is crucial. The Godhead is the ground of all qualities, the source from which the personal God and all divine attributes emerge. It's not just an abstract idea removed from our experience. It's something more purely perfect, more intensely real, and more worthy of devotion than anything we could imagine. The Godhead is the ultimate essence that transcends even the personal divine, inspiring a deeper form of worship and commitment. Huxley suggests that this Godhead requires more than just traditional devotion. To reach a unitive knowledge of the ground, we must practice a discipline that is more arduous and unremitting than anything imposed by religious authority. It's a path that involves purifying the heart and aligning with the timeless awareness of the ground, something that takes us beyond doctrines and into direct experience. So, what can we take from this? Eckhart's teachings remind us that devotion to the personal God is a meaningful step on the journey, but the ultimate destination lies beyond. The Godhead, the ground, is where all divine qualities merge into a perfect, timeless essence. And to know it, we must commit ourselves to a path of unitive discipline, one that takes us out of the realm of intellectual understanding and into a lived reality of oneness. Eckhart wasn't alone in distinguishing between God and the Godhead. The mystic Ruysbroeck, for example, made a similar distinction. He stated, "There is a distinction and differentiation, according to our reason, between God and the Godhead, between action and rest. The fruitful nature of the persons ever worketh in a living differentiation, but the simple being of God, according to the nature thereof, is an eternal rest of God and of all created things." Ruysbroeck paints a picture of the Godhead as the ultimate state of rest, something beyond activity, beyond even the fruitful nature of the divine persons. While God acts and differentiates, the Godhead simply is, in a state of perfect, timeless unity. This idea of the Godhead as eternal rest suggests a profound simplicity, a purity where all creation finds its ultimate peace. Ruysbroeck goes even further, suggesting that in the reality, unitively known by the mystic, there is no longer any distinction between Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or any creature. There, he says, we were all one before our creation, for this is our super essence. There, the Godhead is in simple essence without activity. This is a powerful statement. Ruysbroeck is saying that the Godhead, the ground, holds a kind of pre-creation unity where distinctions disappear. And this is one of those things that I'm going to expand on a different episode where it can kind of just, this topic can just be the entire episode because it's a lot to get into. So it's an essence so simple and pure that it transcends all differentiation, including the aspects of God that we relate to personally. This idea is echoed by another mystic, J.J. Ollier, who said, "The holy light of faith is so pure that, compared with it, particular lights are but impurities, and even ideas of the saints, of the Blessed Virgin, and of the sight of Jesus Christ in his humanity are impediments in the way of the sight of God in its purity." Ollier suggests that as we come closer to experiencing God in its purest form, even the most revered figures and images become impurities, not because they aren't holy, but because they are forms that limit our understanding of the formless ground. To see God in true unity, we must let go of all the individual concepts and ideas, no matter how sacred they are. And that's why I opt for when referring to God, I normally go with the beloved or its or something that doesn't really have anything that we associate to form in our concepts of form. So together, these mystics give us a glimpse of the Godhead as the absolute ground, a pure and undifferentiated state beyond all form and attribute. It's a space where all distinctions fall away, leaving only the essence of unity, an eternal rest and a boundless oneness that lies at the heart of all creation. So, as we reflect on these insights, we're reminded that the journey to the ground involves letting go of every concept, every image, even the ones that have brought us comfort. To truly encounter the Godhead, as Eckhart, Ruysbroeck, and Ollier described it, we must embrace a simplicity beyond words, beyond forms, and step into the presence of the eternal, where everything is one. And getting back to J.J. Ollier, or Jean-Jacques Ollier, he was a devout Catholic and influential religious teacher of the Counter-Reformation. Ollier had an insight that might seem surprising, especially coming from such a figure. He taught that while the formless Godhead represents the highest state of divine awareness, it's not something everyone is ready to grasp. In Ollier's view, only a few people reach a state of consciousness capable of perceiving the divine in its purest, formless essence. For those on what he calls the ordinary levels of being, Ollier recommended other approaches. In fact, he once advised a follower to balance her study of mystical theology with the writings of Saint Gertrude, a saint whose revelations focus on a more accessible, personal experience of God. This idea echoes through many spiritual traditions. Hindu gurus, Catholic teachers, and Sufi guides alike often caution against presenting the formless divine ground to those who may benefit more from the personal and incarnate aspects of God. So why is this distinction important? Well, because it reminds us that the spiritual teachings aren't one size fits all, so to speak. The journey to the ground is gradual, and connecting with a personal God can be a deeply meaningful and transformative step. It's like climbing a mountain to the top. We're all aiming for the top, and some of us are on different sides of the mountain or different heights, or we have different aspects of the mountain, but many of us are already trying to climb. But here, Ollier and Huxley also offer a gentle reminder that the personal God is a beginning, not an end point. The divine, in its highest essence, transcends all form and attribute. Yet, as Huxley points out, there are potential risks in mistaking the personal God for the ultimate reality. And to end this section, he quotes Philo, who warns, "He who thinks that God is any quality and is not the one injures not God, but himself. The message is quite clear. While it's natural to relate to the personal aspects of God, there's a higher purpose in moving beyond these familiar forms toward the ground, the one that lies beyond all qualities. So as we think about this journey, we're reminded that there is value in devotion to the personal God. It's a meaningful step toward the formless ground and can prepare us for deeper spiritual truths. But the journey doesn't end there. As Philo and Ollier suggest, clinging only to the personal form of God may limit our path to unity with the ground. The formless ground invites us to look beyond, to embrace a simplicity that transcends all form and ultimately to reconnect with the source of all being. To further explore this journey towards the formless ground, Huxley offers us words from the mystic Meister Eckhart. Eckhart says, "Thou must love God as not God, not spirit, not person, not image, but as it is, a sheer, pure, absolute one, sundered from all two-ness, and in whom we must eternally sink from nothingness to nothingness." Oh, I love that. Nothingness to nothingness. Oh, that sounds so amazing. I love it. It's so vast. Oh, so fascinating. So here, Eckhart is pointing to the Godhead, the absolute ground that exists beyond any attributes or forms we might attach to it. He invites us to love God not as a personal deity or even as a concept, but as the One, an absolute unity beyond any form, beyond duality. To reach this understanding, Eckhart suggests we must let go of every aspect of self and identity to sink from nothingness to nothingness. And this concept resonates deeply with Mahayana Buddhism's description of the clear light of the void. Huxley draws a parallel to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where, at the moment of death, a Tibetan priest guides the soul towards this clear light, saying, "O nobly born, the time has now come for thee to seek the path. Thy breathing is about to cease. In the past, thy teacher hath set thee face to face with the clear light, and now thou art about to experience it in its reality in the bardo state." The bardo, or intermediate state, is a time for the soul to encounter the clear light, the formless, pure consciousness that Mahayana Buddhism describes as the translucent void without circumference or center. Oh, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. At this profound moment, the soul is advised to know thyself and abide in that state. The clear light, like Eckhart's Godhead, is a state of pure awareness, a union beyond any concept of self or form. Together, these mystical insights from Eckhart and the Buddhist tradition remind us that the journey to the ground involves letting go of all distinctions and all duality, to embrace a boundless unity. And whether called the Pure One or the clear light of the void, the ground is the ultimate reality where individuality dissolves and we come to rest in the eternal essence of the divine. And as we reflect on these teachings, we're invited to consider the nature of this divine ground that lies beyond personhood, image, and form. The journey, whether through life, through devotion, or through death, is a movement towards oneness, a return to the clear light, to the formless presence that exists beyond duality and into the absolute. Huxley guides us back to the ancient wisdom of the Upanishads. One of the earliest teachings of the Absolute One describes Brahman as a super-essential no-thing. Actually, that sounds like a great album title, Super Essential No Thing. I love it. So anyway, the super essential no thing is a reality so fundamental that it can only be approached by saying, not this, or in Sanskrit, neti, neti. This ultimate reality is beyond any description, and so the only way to approach it is through negation, by letting go of all concepts and forms. In the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, Brahman is called the reality of reality, the ultimate essence from which all relative realities arise. There is, as Huxley describes, a hierarchy of reality, where the world we experience is real in its own way, but is sustained by the ground. Brahman, or the Absolute, exists as the foundation of all things, holding within it the reality of our everyday experiences. This path of negation, of moving beyond form and name, is further echoed by the 5th century Dionysius the Areopagite. Dionysius describes the divine as a superluminous darkness, a paradoxical presence that is both obscure and radiant, filling our minds with transcendent beauty precisely because it is beyond perception and knowledge. Ooh, I love that. In Dionysius's words, we long exceedingly to dwell in this translucent darkness and, through not seeing and not knowing, to see it who is beyond vision and knowledge by the very fact of neither seeing it nor knowing it. For Dionysius, the divine is like a hidden sculpture within stone, revealed only by the carving away everything that obscures it. Just as a sculptor uncovers a form by removing excess stone, we come closer to the divine ground by shedding all attributes and ideas, moving from particulars to universals, until nothing remains but the pure, unknowable essence. And as we conclude, Huxley leaves us with a final insight into the nature of the divine ground, and the limitations we face when trying to describe it. The world, as we know it through common sense, is composed of individual things, causal events, and a vast, orderly cosmos. Our language and vocabulary were created to describe this everyday world. But what happens when we try to talk about something beyond this common sense reality? What happens when we try to describe the ground, something outside of time, something boundless and infinitely different from the world of things and events? Here, language begins to fail us. Traditional syntax, even advanced systems like mathematics, fall short of capturing the reality of the ground. This is why, as Huxley explains, we find paradox, mystery, and even seeming blasphemy in the writings of mystics. The language they use is stretched to its limits, trying to express something for which no words really exist. Huxley reminds us to be patient with these linguistic eccentricities, for they reflect an attempt to describe a realm that lies beyond human experience. In a sense, the language of mysticism is an invitation. It's like a call to move beyond words and concepts to experience the divine ground not through intellect, but through direct inner knowing. And so, as we end this chapter, we are invited to dwell in that mystery, to look past the limitations of words and rest in the timeless presence of the ground itself. Huxley brings us to a final, essential insight about the nature of the ground and the limits of language. And as we've seen, language was developed to describe a world of objects and qualities, a world of things. But the ground, as Eckhart reminds us, is no thing. God is not a what, as the mystic Scotus Erigena put it, but rather a that. The ground can only be acknowledged as present, as something beyond all categories of thought and description. This is why, as Huxley says, that our knowledge of the ground when expressed in words must always be paradoxical. True knowledge of the divine ground doesn't come from reading or thinking about it. It comes only through union, a direct experience that requires us to transcend our ego, to let go of the self-regarding I that creates the separation between thou and the that. So, as we wrap things up, we're invited to move beyond words, beyond definitions and concepts, and to rest in the mystery of the ground. The Perennial Philosophy invites us to let go of the need for descriptions and instead to seek union, to find the presence of the ground within ourselves, not by understanding but by being. In this moment, we can embrace the mystery, knowing that the ground is there, beyond all words, beyond all thoughts, waiting for us in silence. So, we have traveled a lot through some of the deepest insights of the Perennial Philosophy, exploring the nature of the divine ground. We began with the idea that the ground sustains all life, moving beyond the limitations of the personal God towards a formless unity that exists beyond time and space, and through the words of Eckhart, Ollier, Ruysbroeck, and other mystics, we glimpse the invitation to let go of our attachment to form and enter into the translucent darkness, that luminous mystery of pure being. We reflected on the limitations of language, which can point us towards the ground but can never truly describe it. And we learned that union with the ground comes not through knowing, but through being. Beyond ego, beyond separation, in a direct experience of unity. And as we bring this episode to a close, we're left with a message of hope. In a world filled with distinctions, separations, and distractions, there exists a ground of unity within each of us, beyond words and thoughts. This ground patiently sustains us, offering each moment as an opportunity to remember our true nature. Whether we feel close to it or distant, the ground is always there, waiting, welcoming us to a reality where all things are one. May we find peace in this truth, and may it guide us with hope on our journey. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Mystican Identity, where we uncover the unity within every tradition. I hope today's journey inspired a sense of connection with the shared tapestry of spiritual wisdom. And as you reflect on these insights, remember what unites us at our core. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and share it with others on a similar path. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the wisdom that binds us all. I wish you and your loved ones all the best. Have a wonderful experience. Theme music by Timur Haysen.